I drove to Grandma Eleanor's house on a dull, gray morning, and the sky looked like it couldn't decide whether to rain or not. Her place sat at the end of the lane with white paint and green shutters, the same as always, but it felt different now, quieter, heavier. When I opened the gate, it gave its usual squeak, and that small sound made my chest tighten, like the house itself remembered me. Inside, the living room was full of family, but none of the warmth was there. Aunt Marianne stood near the fireplace, with her arms crossed, and Uncle George kept tapping his fingers against his knee. My cousins were spread out like they didn't want to sit too close, Sophie on the couch, Clara by the bookshelf, and Nathan near the window, watching everyone like he owned the room. At the dining table, Mr. Alden, the lawyer, arranged papers in neat stacks, calm and polished, as if grief was just another appointment. I chose Grandma's old, listening chair in the corner and tried to keep my face steady. The clock ticked loud in the silence. Then Nathan laughed once and said, "She doesn't deserve a penny," and the room agreed without even looking at me. They had been waiting for this moment, I could tell. Not because they missed Grandma, not because they wanted to honor her, but because they wanted an ending that suited them. The kind of ending where the good people got rewarded and that a problem person got pushed aside. I sat in the corner and felt like I was watching a play where everyone knew their lines except me. Nathan kept his eyes on me like he was trying to pin me to the chair with a look. He liked being the loud one, the one who said what everyone else secretly thought. And the worst part was that he didn't even look nervous saying it. He looked pleased, like he'd finally found a time when being cruel was allowed. "Grandma always got fooled," he said, loud enough to fill the whole room. "She didn't see things clearly in the end. People took advantage. And we all know who brought drama into this family." Aunt Marianne made a small sound of agreement, not a full sentence, just a hum that gave Nathan permission to keep going. She adjusted her necklace, the one with the tiny gold charm Grandma used to compliment, and her eyes slid away from mine like I was something messy she didn't want on her hands. "You can't blame us for being honest," she added. "We watched it happen. We watched her worry. We watched her spend money when she shouldn't have. Love makes you blind, but it doesn't change facts." I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to list every time I visited, every grocery bag I carried in, every doctor appointment I helped arrange, every late-night call I answered when Grandma couldn't sleep. But I also knew how they worked. The moment I spoke, they would say I was making it about me. The moment I cried, they would say I was acting. The moment I stayed calm, they would say I didn't care. I had seen this trap before, and I didn't want to walk into it again. Uncle George leaned back in his chair with his hands on his stomach and sighed like a man tired of a long, boring story. "Let's just get this over with," he said. "We've all got places to be. If she left you anything, it'll be something small. A token. Maybe 500 pounds to keep things polite." Sophie's eyes flicked toward me, soft and unsure. She was the only one who looked like she felt bad, but she didn't say anything. Sophie hated conflict so much that she would rather let a lie sit in the middle of a room than touch it. Clara stayed quiet too, scrolling on her phone, but I could see her mouth tighten every few seconds, like she was swallowing words. Nathan snorted. "Even $1 would be too much," he said, and a few people chuckled, like they'd just heard a clever joke. That laugh went through me like cold water. Not because it hurt my feelings, though it did, but because it showed how easy it was for them to turn me into a thing. Not a person, not family, just a character they could blame whenever the family needed a villain. Mr. Alden didn't interrupt. He sat at the dining table with his papers and his laptop, listening as if this was all expected. His calm bothered me at first. I kept thinking he should tell them to stop, but then I noticed something. He wasn't reacting because he didn't need to. He wasn't uncomfortable because he wasn't unsure. He looked like a man holding a card he planned to play at exactly the right moment. When the room finally quieted, Mr. Alden cleared his throat. "I understand emotions are high," he said. His voice was smooth, the kind of voice that could read bad news without flinching. "But your grandmother's will is clear. We will follow it." Aunt Marianne lifted her chin. "Clear how?" "She wouldn't leave everything to her. She didn't say my name. she said to her, like my name would leave a stain in her mouth. Nathan tapped the window glass with one finger, like he was counting seconds. Grandma loved everyone, he said. She'd want things split fairly. The house can be sold, the money can be divided. That's what makes sense. Something about the way he said, makes sense, bothered me. It wasn't a suggestion. It sounded like a decision already made, like he'd been imagining it for months. I thought about how often he visited Grandma when she was alive, how he always arrived empty-handed and left with leftovers wrapped in foil. I thought about the way Grandma sometimes got quiet when his name came up, how she would change the subject and start talking about the weather. Mr. Alden's mouth twitched into a small smile. Not friendly. Not cruel. Just knowing. Actually, he said, and that single word cut through the room like a clean slice, your grandmother did not choose to divide things equally. Uncle George frowned. Then what did she do? Mr. Alden rested his hands on the table. She left everything to the one who helped her catch the thief in this family. The words didn't land like a normal sentence. They landed like a dropped plate, sudden and sharp. For a second, nobody moved. Even the clock ticking seemed too loud. Aunt Marianne blinked hard. Thief, she repeated, like she'd misheard him. Sophie sat up straight. What do you mean, thief? Clara finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide, as if she'd been pulled out of a dream. Nathan laughed, but this time it sounded wrong. Thin. Forced. That's ridiculous, he said. There's no thief. This is just lawyer drama. But I felt it in my stomach. Not fear exactly. More like a cold certainty. Grandma had told me once, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, people take things when they think you're too tired to notice. I didn't ask what she meant then, because she changed the subject. But I remembered it now. Mr. Alden turned his laptop around. Your grandmother anticipated disbelief, he said. That is why she instructed me to show you something. Uncle George leaned forward. Marianne's hand tightened around the back of a chair. Sophie's lips parted. Clara held her phone frozen in midair. Even Nathan stopped moving, though he tried to look bored, like none of this mattered. Mr. Alden clicked on a folder. I saw a list of files, names, and dates. My skin prickled, because I realized Grandma hadn't just suspected something. She had prepared. She had watched. She had collected proof, quietly, like she was building a wall around her truth. Mr. Alden looked up at the room. Before I play this, he said, I want you to understand something. This isn't about humiliation. It's about honesty. Your grandmother wanted the person who stood by her, who listened, who helped, who didn't dismiss her, to be the one protected after she was gone. My throat tightened, because I knew what he was saying without him saying my name. I remembered late nights at Grandma's kitchen table, the way she stared at her tea like it held secrets. I remembered her asking me to check the locks twice. I remembered her telling me she felt foolish for worrying, and me telling her, you're not foolish. You're careful. Mr. Alden's finger hovered over the play button. The room leaned in without meaning to, drawn by the danger of what was coming. Nobody wanted to look away first. Nobody wanted to be the one who missed it. Nathan swallowed. I saw it. A small, quick movement in his throat. His hand went into his pocket like he was looking for something to hold. And then Mr. Alden pressed play. The video opened on Grandma's hallway, filmed from a high corner near the ceiling. The picture was clear enough to make my stomach twist, because it wasn't some blurry guess. It was real. It showed the runner rug with its faded pattern, the table under the mirror, the bowl where Grandma dropped her keys, and the framed photos that lined the wall like quiet witnesses. In the corner of the screen, a timestamp glowed, 2:17 a.m. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The hall just sat there, still and empty, as if the house was holding its breath. I could hear the soft whir of the laptop fan and the dry sound of someone swallow in the room behind me. Then a shadow crossed the bottom of the frame, slow and careful, and a person stepped into view. At first, the figure was just a shape, coat, shoulders, head lowered. But the way he moved made something in me go cold. He didn't creep like a stranger. He didn't hesitate like someone who didn't know the house. He walked straight down the hallway, stepping around a loose floorboard near the second photo frame. That board always squeaked. Grandma used to joke that it was the house telling on you. The man avoided it without thinking. He stopped at the small table under the mirror. His hand slid into the drawer like he'd done it before. He pulled out a small pouch, the one Grandma kept tucked behind a stack of old envelopes. I knew that pouch. Soft leather, worn at the corners, tied with a thin string. It held pieces of her life, an old ring, a little cash for emergencies, and small things she didn't want to lose. The man lifted the pouch and paused. For half a second, he looked up toward the mirror, and the camera caught his face as it turned. The room around me seemed to shrink. My ears rang. Because there was no doubt. It was Nathan. Uncle George made a rough sound, like he'd been punched in the stomach. Aunt Marianne's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide and wet. Sophie whispered, "No," over and over, like the word could change what she was seeing. Clara's phone slipped from her fingers onto the carpet with a dull thud, but she didn't even notice. Nathan shot up from his place by the window. "That's a," he started, but the words came out tangled. "That's not what it looks like. That's not." Mr. Alden didn't stop the video. He let it run, calm as stone. On the screen, Nathan tucked the pouch into his coat and moved down the hall, still careful, still quiet. He walked out of frame like nothing had happened. Like he was leaving a room he belonged in. Then the clip ended. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick, the kind that makes you aware of every breath. I stared at the laptop screen, not because I needed more proof, but because my brain couldn't catch up to my eyes. I felt angry, yes, but more than that I felt tired. Tired of how fast people had believed the worst about me, and how hard they were going to work now to pretend they hadn't believed the best about Nathan. Mr. Alden clicked another file. "There is more," he said quietly. "Your grandmother didn't want this to become a shouting match. She wanted it documented." Nathan leaned forward, his face tight. "This is private," he snapped. "You can't just." "It's her house," Mr. Alden replied, still calm. "Her cameras. Her evidence. You don't get to decide what's private when you're the one taking what isn't yours." Aunt Marianne turned slowly toward Nathan as if she'd never seen him before. "Nathan," she said, and her voice cracked. "Tell me this isn't true." Nathan's eyes darted around the room. He was searching for an opening, a weak point, someone who would rescue him the way the family always rescued the loud ones. "I was helping," he said quickly. "I was keeping it safe." Grandma got confused. She forgot where she put things. "I was trying to." "Stop," Sophie whispered, and that single word was sharper than anything Nathan had said all morning. Mr. Alden pressed play on the second clip. This time it was the kitchen camera, facing the table. The date stamp showed the next morning. Grandma sat in her chair, wearing her blue robe, her hair brushed back the way she did when she wanted to feel in control. She looked smaller than she used to, but her eyes were clear. She wasn't confused. She wasn't drifting. She looked like a woman who had decided she would not be treated like a fool. Then the kitchen door opened, and I walked in with a grocery bag. I recognized my own posture, already ready to apologize for arriving early, already checking her face for signs of trouble. In the video, I set the bag down and leaned toward her, and she said something I couldn't hear without sound, but I remembered the words anyway. "Something's gone missing." I watched myself sit beside her and listen. No eye roll. No joke. No, "Are you sure?" I watched myself open a notebook, write down times, ask what she last remembered. I watched myself move through the house with her, checking drawers, checking the cabinet where she kept her tin of tea. I watched myself stand with her in the hallway, pointing up at the camera and saying, "Let's look." In the footage, Grandma turned her head toward me and spoke again. Even without sound, I could read her mouth. I don't want trouble. I want truth. My hands clenched in my lap as I watched. It felt strange to see it from the outside, like proof of my own life. I hadn't done any of it thinking I'd need credit. I'd done it because Grandma was scared, and I couldn't stand the idea of her being scared in her own home. The clip jumped ahead. Now we were seated at the kitchen table again, and I was holding the phone to my ear. The timestamp showed that I had called Mr. Alden. In the video, Grandma sat very still, waiting, while I spoke. When I hung up, I turned to her and nodded. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her fingers looked thin, but steady. She held my hand for a long moment, and I could see her lips move, slow and careful. I knew what she said because she said it to me that day, in the same voice she used when she wanted me to understand something forever. Thank you for believing me. The clip ended. The room stayed frozen. It was like we had all stepped into a different version of the family, one where the old rules didn't work anymore. Nathan stared at the laptop screen as if he could erase it with his eyes. Aunt Marianne's shoulders shook once, like she was swallowing a sob. Uncle George looked down at his hands, and I could tell he was remembering every time he had joked about Grandma being forgetful. Mr. Alden closed the laptop halfway, not shutting it, just lowering the screen as if to say the evidence had spoken and didn't need to shout. Your grandmother, he said, did not want her final story to be written by the loudest voice in the room. She wanted it written by truth. I looked at Nathan then. Really looked at him. He wasn't the confident cousin anymore. He was just a man caught in a bright light, trapped by his own choices. And in that quiet, I realized something that made my chest ache. Grandma hadn't just left evidence for the will. She had left it for me. So I wouldn't spend the rest of my life wondering if I should have spoken louder, fought harder, proved myself more. She had done the proving herself. The house, the footage, the silence, everything was telling the same story now. And for the first time in that room, no one could pretend it was about me. Mr. Alden set the laptop down and let the silence sit for a moment, like he was giving everyone time to accept what they couldn't unsee. The room felt smaller now, not because the walls moved, but because the truth filled every corner. The old clock kept ticking, steady and stubborn, and I found myself staring at it as if it could tell me what happened next. Nathan tried to speak again, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. This is being twisted, he said, and it sounded like he didn't believe himself. He looked around, searching for someone to jump in, someone to soften it, someone to say, he didn't mean it. But no one moved. Even Sophie, who hated conflict, sat with her hands clenched together, her face wet, and she didn't look away this time. Aunt Marianne took a shaky step toward Nathan. You went into her house at night, she said, her words slow and broken, like her mind kept tripping over them. You took something from her drawer. She swallowed hard. Why? Nathan lifted his hands as if he could build a wall out of air. I needed it, he said too quickly. I was in trouble. I was going to put it back. You know how things are. Bills. Pressure. It wasn't like I was stealing from a stranger. Uncle George's laugh came out rough and ugly. That's exactly what you were doing, he said. You were stealing from your grandmother. Nathan's eyes flashed. Don't act like you're innocent, he snapped. You all wanted money. You just wanted to look polite while you waited for it. That hit the room like a slap, because it wasn't completely wrong. I watched Uncle George stiffen. I watched Aunt Marianne's face tighten. I watched Clara stare at the carpet, like she was counting the threads because she didn't want to count her own thoughts. The truth was messy, and it didn't only point in one direction. Mr. Alden cleared his throat. Enough, he said, not loud, but firm. We are not here to argue about feelings. We are here to read the will. He slid a folder across the table and opened it carefully, like it was something fragile. The paper looked thick and official, but I could still imagine Grandma's hand signing her name, steady and certain. Mr. Alden adjusted his glasses, then began to read. Eleanor Hartwell, he said, being of sound mind, leaves the following. The words sounded formal, almost cold, but I could hear Grandma behind them, like her voice was tucked inside the sentences. My heart beat hard in my chest. Part of me wanted to stand up and walk out, not because I didn't care, but because the room felt dangerous now. A room full of people who had agreed, seconds ago, that I deserved nothing. Mr. Alden continued. To my granddaughter, he said, and my name followed, clear and undeniable. I leave my house, including all contents, and my personal accounts. Aunt Mary Ann made a sound that was half gasp, half breath. Uncle George sat up straight. All of it, he said, like the word tasted wrong. Mr. Alden nodded once. The house, he repeated. And savings totaling $180,000. He glanced down and read the next line. And a separate amount of £12,500, set aside specifically for home repairs, as instructed by Eleanor. Even in the middle of this, that detail felt like Grandma. She always had a practical plan, even when the world around her was falling apart. I could almost hear her saying, fix the roof properly. Don't patch it. Do it once and do it right. Nathan's chair scraped as he shifted. This is insane, he muttered. She wouldn't, she couldn't. She did, Mr. Alden said, and his calmness made it sound final, like a door closing. Sophie covered her mouth, tears spilling again. Grandma, she whispered, as if Grandma might answer from somewhere in the hallway. Clara finally spoke, her voice low. Why, she asked, not at Mr. Alden, but into the room itself. Why would Grandma do that? Mr. Alden reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope. Because, he said, she wanted her reasons understood. He held up the envelope so everyone could see the handwriting on the front. Grandma's handwriting. Neat, slanted slightly right, careful like she was trying to make sure nobody misread her. Mr. Alden opened it slowly and unfolded a letter. He began to read, and as his voice filled the room, it felt like Grandma was there again, not as a memory, but as a presence. She wrote that she loved her family, but love didn't mean she ignored truth. She wrote that being loud wasn't the same as being right. She wrote that she had felt herself becoming invisible in the eyes of people who decided she was old before she was gone. She wrote that the worst part wasn't the missing pouch or the money. The worst part was how easily some people smiled while treating her like she couldn't notice. Then Mr. Alden read a line that made my throat burn. She wrote that I was not perfect, and she didn't need me to be. She wrote that I was simply the only one who didn't dismiss her fear. The only one who sat down, listened, and helped her find the truth without making her feel foolish. The only one who stayed beside her when it would have been easier to shrug and say, it's probably nothing. And then came the line that broke something open in me. When people think they can take from me, she wrote, they are really testing who will stand beside me. I stared at the floor because if I looked up, I knew I would cry, and I didn't want to give Nathan any more power over my face. My hands trembled slightly in my lap, and I pressed my palms together until the shaking calmed. When the letter ended, Mr. Alden folded it and set it gently on the table. Nobody spoke. The silence was different now. It wasn't a silence of shock. It was a silence of shame. Nathan's voice cut through it, sharp again because fear can sound like anger. So that's it, he said. She punishes everyone because I made one mistake? Uncle George stood up slowly. One mistake, he repeated, and his voice was quiet, which somehow made it worse. You went into her house at night and took from her. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Aunt Mary Ann wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at me then, finally. Her eyes were red, and her mouth trembled. I didn't know, she said, and it wasn't an excuse, just a small truth. I didn't know. I wanted to say, you didn't want to know. But I held it back. Not because I forgave her in that moment, but because I could feel Grandma's letter still hanging in the air, asking for truth, not a fight. Mr. Alden cleared his throat again, softer this time. There are legal steps, he said. And there are personal steps. The legal ones are clear. Nathan looked like he might lunge, might shout, might break something just to feel powerful again. But then Sophie stood, wiping her face, and walked to the hallway without looking at him. Clara followed, silent. Aunt Marianne sank into a chair, her shoulders slumped as if she'd aged in 1 hour. I stayed in Grandma's listening chair for a moment longer, breathing slowly, letting the room settle. I looked around at the furniture, the framed photos, the little cracks in the paint that Grandma always meant to fix. It was strange to think that the house was mine now, not just in papers, but in responsibility. When I finally stood, my legs felt unsteady, but my mind felt clear. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard. The oak tree still stood there, wide and patient. The old swing hung from its branch, moving slightly in the draft from the window, like someone had just left it. And in that moment, I understood what Grandma had really left me. Not just money, not just a house, not just numbers like $180,000 and 12,500 pounds. She left me proof. She left me dignity. She left me the truth, sealed and saved, so that when the room tried to decide who I was, the story wouldn't belong to them. It would belong to Grandma. And now, in a quiet way, it belonged to me too.